There's moments where you invest in different parts of your career path. What I've started to do is really connect with individuals outside of my role and team, as well as outside of my company. If I want to be super up to date on the industry and what's happening, sometimes the best sources of information is people.
Standing out in the competitive world of tech requires a keen attention to having integrity, being willing to take risks, all while staying focused and being prepared for a marathon. Today's guest is Sila Gurman, who, as the head of strategy and planning for Google Commerce and formerly at Amazon, has been on the front lines of the work, leading teams, and navigating the unexpected. In the face of an industry undergoing the most rapid rate of change in human history, Sila is intent on setting herself up for success, not just in the short term, but also for what's to come. Is it easy? No. But when you've been at the forefront the way she has, it's all about having the right tools. This is episode 4 of Tiffany's podcast. Amazing to have you here, Sila. Honestly, I'm just blown away with what you've been able to do within your career, and I'm very excited to dive into some of that together on today's episode. Please join me in welcoming Sila to our show, where she is currently the head of strategy and planning for Google Commerce with a really inspiring career across tech. I mean, Sila, your track record for user-first, insight-driven strategies that really deliver these consistent results, whether through your time at Amazon and now the work that you're doing with Google, is really one for the books. And I really thank you for being here to help kind of remove the veil a little bit and see what's gotten you to this point in your career. So, why don't you share a little bit with us around your background, kind of those ebbs and flows in terms of the roles that you've held, and we'll get it going.
Sounds great. I should come on this more often. This is so flattering.
Yeah, absolutely. But my team and I are always witnessing and supporting the number of curveballs that people face while building their career. And I'd love to know if you can share some that you've experienced and how you've turned them into your advantage. Even, what was the craziest one, like okay, we're doing this moment? What was that like for you?
I think nowadays the business world just has so many curveballs because there's so much change, especially in the industry that I'm in, which is tech. There's constant change and innovation. And so I almost feel like curveballs are the status quo, and I try to prepare myself for that. But one moment that stands out is when I was working at Amazon. We woke up one day, hit the gym, read the news, and apparently Amazon acquired Whole Foods. Great. That's interesting. Then I go into the office and they basically tell me, by the way, Whole Foods is going to be absorbed by your team. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. What does that mean for all of us? And of course, when there's like big business shifts and investments like this, the organization also has to restructure around the new priorities to make sure that, we're all set up for success. And so there were, positives and negatives to our team as a result of this big piece of news. And in that moment, I kind of said, well, this is a huge opportunity. This was also many years ago, pre-pandemic, where we didn't know what this thing was going to look like. And so I kind of raised my hand and I said, I think I want to be a part of this big change. It wasn't an easy decision. In hindsight, it's kind of like a no-brainer, but in the moment, it's sort of like taking on a really big challenge, right? It is, I think Amazon spent about $14 billion on the acquisition, the most money it had ever spent on anything. I knew Jeff Bezos, who was still the CEO at the time, was going to be watching it with hawk eyes. So it was quite a risk and a challenge. But given everything, I kind of raised my hand and I said, okay, we're doing this. I'm going to do this. And I pivoted over and, it was a lot of fun. I'm so thankful that I did it. It's one of the most memorable moments of my career to sort of launch Whole Foods on Amazon.com, wake up the next day, see it in the news, and sort of see the business take off from there. But yeah, I think again, just given the world that we live in, and especially within the tech industry, there's just like, I always say that change is constant, and so curveballs are constant, and it's sort of up to you to decide, are you gonna ride this one or are you gonna, kinda let it happen? And, there's times where you just kinda wanna go with it versus kind of, like, take a step back, and so that was a really fun moment for me.
Oh my gosh, I bet. I mean, what a career milestone right there, taking on, a brand like Whole Foods. And I think that was such a nice extension for you, Scylla, with your work in kind of the grocery retail side with what you were doing with Amazon and like to get that on the map, when we talk about accomplishments in a career, I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good one to have under your belt. And I'm curious because you mentioned obviously at the time it was such a big priority for Jeff Bezos and probably the broader team as well. Did you have any close proximity with him at that point and kind of working through those strategies? Or how did that kind of come to life in some of those initial weeks from the moment that acquisition news came out to also bringing it to market officially?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was definitely not senior enough to kind of have close proximity to Bezos, but yeah, I think, it was definitely a very intense time period. If not him, his proxies definitely were kind of like reviewing the results pretty regularly. But the good news is, the first couple of launches went really smoothly and set a really positive and strong tone for the next launches.
Right.
And we just saw like really strong business results. And as you know, it's now sort of like it's become a habit, and it's a service that's nationally available. And yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a user, and I buy my groceries off of it every week still because it's my baby, and I love to see how the product and the experience continues to evolve. So
Oh, that's so beautiful. No, this is really incredible. And I really appreciate that you shared this notion of curveballs and like anticipating for it because the more we see that in our day to day, like we can't be surprised. We know that we're going to be kept on our toes and what you're experiencing within the tech space. It's kind of the living and breathing dynamic every single week. So I am a little curious from you, Scylla. If you think about some of the curveballs that you've been dealt over the years, was there ever one where you decided like it was not okay and that you actually needed to make a change, whether for your professional development or maybe internally to navigate that change a little bit better?
yeah. No, definitely. I think, kind of continuing along the same story, when we were launching Whole Foods, we were actually launching it store by store, right? Because it's a very localized experience. And there were 200 stores at the time across the country, and we were basically launching one store about every 2 weeks. That was the goal that was given to us. And if you think about it, it was, there was a lot of moving pieces that needed to be in place across like marketing, operations, supply chain, like you just the whole gamut, right? And we were building everything from scratch each time. And so I did that for about, I'd say maybe 5 to 6 months, set the strategy, set the cadence, saw the business take off. And I kind of remember looking up ahead and being like, oh my God, we still have like 100 of stores left. Like, I'm going to have to do this 100 more times. And in that moment, I sort of like decided, okay, like, I've been on this curveball for long enough and it's time to make a change. I don't need to keep doing this. And that's where I sort of like decided that it was time for a different type of challenge. And I moved internally within Amazon from the retail side of the business to the advertising side of the business, where I was given an opportunity to set up sort of like industry thought leadership from scratch. And that was a whole new challenge of building a new sub function, and eventually grew to hire and build a team of 7. So kind of like took a, I'd say like business challenge to more of like a leadership management challenge. And that's sort of like how I navigated that, time of my career.
That's amazing, Scylla. Was that one of the first times that you started building your own team?
Yeah. Yes. Up until then, I was sort of managing through dotted lines. So if you think about like a Whole Foods launch, right? Like we had multiple marketing channels that needed to go live at the same time, and I was sort of like the manager of that, but I wasn't directly managing those individuals. And so this shift allowed me to have, direct reports, coaching, performance management in a more official, formal manner than just sort of like, overseeing and ensuring that projects are good to go from start to completion.
Oh, this is so good. I love that we're already kind of starting to see this incredible breakdown for you of what's kind of amounted to where you're at today, Sila. And we're going to spend even more time, discussing your career and some of the amazing work that you've been doing. But I'm also really interested in knowing what kind of person you see yourself as, right? If I just had to ask, who is Sila Gurman? What comes top of mind for you?
You know what? It's like one of the questions I struggle with the most. Because I'm actually, like, a very shy, introverted person. Like, if you give me some downtime, I'd love to just, like, read a book and, like, watch some, like, art films and, like, spend quality time with family and friends. But, I always have to remind myself that I do have, like, kinda like an adventurous side to myself, and I think that's what's kind of, like, made me, move down to New York from Toronto, where, like, I was living a great life. I was, life was good. But, I wanted to pursue a greater career and sort of like embarked upon this journey of living in New York and trying to like work in tech, even though like all of tech is in SF or like, on the West Coast. So I'd say I've got this kind of like duality to me.
Oh, I mean, that's just fascinating though, because it shows that there's a lot of depth to you, Scylla, and how you've built your career up to now, and also kind of standing out. That might be not necessarily that instinctive tech hub, but I mean, you've built such an incredible growth path already there, and I know there's even more coming your way, which is so exciting. And I think that's kind of a nice segue for me on this one too, because as you know, our primary focus is really helping corporate professionals navigate their career development, especially within the consumer brand and tech space, to do that with confidence and reach those higher levels of growth for themselves. And something we focus on a lot, but maybe not enough, is actually having good habits. So I'm really keen to hear from you, what are some habits that you've established over the years that have helped elevate both your performance and results, especially in such a competitive environment?
Yeah. One habit that I've developed in the last couple of years, which, I wasn't able to do throughout my career. And I think, there's moments where you invest in different parts of your career path. But in the last couple of years, what I've started to do is really connect with individuals outside of my role and team, as well as outside of my company. And I kind of, I got this habit from sort of observing one of my sort of like directors in my current role. And, one of the roles and sort of like valid pieces of value that I add for her is kind of like being the expert on the industry, being this thought leader. And I was sort of seeing that, like, I'd be like, oh, so and so acquired so and so, and like, here's what's happening with that industry or with that sector. So I started to think like, if I want to be super up to date on the industry and what's happening, sometimes the best sources of information is people, right? And you need to sort of get outside of your role, outside of your team, outside of your company to really access and tap into that expertise and information in the most up-to-date way. And so the habit that I've built is to, when I come across individuals within my company who I think have cool jobs that, don't even relate to what I do, or, I sometimes proactively search on LinkedIn individuals who are in my industry, but at a different company, sometimes even a competitor who I think is sort of like a gold standard at what we do. And I'll just honestly, I'll cold call them, whether on LinkedIn or internally. And I have no agenda, but just to sort of like connect, share information, share knowledge. Like, what's your role like? What's mine like? And I found that those conversations can be enriching and for both sides and really fulfilling and just good vibes, and you just never know when any of those connections will actually come back to you in a valuable way, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is to just sort of, like, enjoy the journey and see where it takes you.
Mm. I so appreciate you sharing that, Scylla. I can echo that 1,000 times over. I mean, what you've just described is really that importance of building your support system, or as I always like to call it with our clients, is that cheer squad that goes beyond just you and your work. And you mentioned it so nicely, right? That it's really about building those connections without expecting anything in return and leading with genuine curiosity, right? It's always that kind of balance of being genuinely interested, not genuinely interesting, and not making it all about you. So it sounds like this is a habit that's really served you well, of leading with that intention of, I want to get to know these people. I want to, see what they're up to, and maybe insights I can take back that will help you in your own career development or the work that you're doing with your teams, whether at Google or, formerly at Amazon. And I will also say the added plus that might be kind of the back of your mind still is it also just really helps build your reputation and visibility and the type of person that you want to be known for. So it has such a nice dual benefit, especially if you make it a habit and do it consistently. So kudos to you for making that a top priority. I love that. Yeah. I'm also kind of curious, was there ever a time for you, Scylla, where the competition, I know we've talked a lot about, tech and the space that we're in, it's intense. There's like moving parts all the time. And so for you, was there ever a time where the competition, whether, internal competition at the company, kind of fighting for a certain role or facing industry competitors, felt like too much or negatively impacted you in some way?
Yeah. I mean, multiple times. Right? I think, careers are difficult, and everything I find is it's just getting more and more competitive. So I think, the way that I've navigated, or I try to navigate, is, focusing on what you can control, right? And sort of, you know, the things that I can control are how I show up, right? Both in terms of my output, but also in terms of how I show up for the other individual. So I'll always strive to do my highest quality work, or what is required, and maybe a little bit above and beyond that at the time. But what I really focus in those moments is showing up with kindness and empathy. Um, and and therefore, sort of like knowing that I've done my best and I've shown up as my best self, helps me sort of, like, I guess, be mindful that I have done everything that is within my control. The rest is outside of my control, and therefore there's nothing that I can. There's not much more that I can do. There's nothing that I can stress about. And actually, Bezos has a good quote, that, stress is it results from inaction, or the inability to take action. But once you start taking action, you find that stress starts to diminish. And so I try to sort of like keep that in mind and say, what is the thing that I can action given this hyper competitive environment? And it is how I show up in the quality of the work that I put out, and how I show up as a kind, empathetic human, and the rest will sort of unfold as it should, and that's sort of beyond my control, and that sort of is what gives me the zen and the calm, and sort of like the strength to pursue, or be persistent, in the moment.
I love that you just broke that down really practically for us, because sometimes we could think about, competition, and it could become so overwhelming. Like, well, where do I even start? And then to your point, you can very easily fall into the spectrum of the things that are out of your control and just get too caught up with that. So the fact that you get really laser focused in on, no, these are the things I can control. It's not always easy, but it also helps you show up with the integrity that you want. And I think that's so important for you, Scylla. It's probably what's also served you so well in your roles and navigating through those moments of challenge and competition, while kind of keeping your eye on the prize, whatever that is, whether it's nature of the work or the relationships that you're building. So Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners of how they can really view a competitive situation and focus on the things within their control to take action. I always love, this notion too of sometimes we feel like we have to be confident to take action. And so we just wait to feel confident one day when in reality, it's taking action that's going to build the confidence and build those micro steps day after day that actually gets you closer to the bigger goals that you're working towards. So sounds like you've kind of got that well underway, which is amazing to hear.
I mean, it took years to get it underway. I think nothing's easy, right?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it all takes practice. I've definitely been in positions where the competition was overwhelming and was impacting my wellness. But, after you kind of go through it once, then you realize, okay, how do I kind of like recalibrate the next time this occurs? Because competition will always be present. And as you
Totally.
get more senior, it actually intensifies. So it's just making sure that you learn from the past and equip yourself in the best way possible to, you know, uh, manage the situations the next time you encounter them.
Yeah, definitely. Such a good point. Do you find for you, Scylla, there was like a turning point very specifically that helped you see that shift, whether a certain type of role you were in or a certain level of seniority that you hit or just exposure to something enough times? What do you feel for you was that kind of like aha of like, okay, no, that's not serving me anymore. I should really focus on the things I can control.
Yeah, I think exposure. I think what I'll say is, tech is competitive. And what I'll say is that tech in New York is even more competitive because there are fewer jobs and a lot of candidates. And so I definitely have been exposed to hyper competition many times over. And I have found like each time I reflect and I think, reflection and sort of like looking back and figuring out what your learnings are also one of the most important things that I've sort of like that I have made a habit, right? And there comes a point where you're just like, well, there's not much more I can do. And so I could either sit here and be stressed out about what might happen, right? Or I could just sort of like have confidence and calm knowing that, I've done my best. And and more often than not, at least in my career, like what I've seen is that the things that I stressed about and worried about did not actually occur, right? So a lot of it is actually in our minds. And the more we shift our thinking to be positive, the more you're actually inviting positivity and, positive opportunity into your life as well. So yes.
That is spot on. I'm really happy you kind of brought in the whole mindset factor here because you're right. We can make things out to be a lot worse in our mind than in reality. And, even just coming from a place of abundance, instead of defaulting to the like, oh gosh, what if this doesn't work out? What if I fail? What if I mess up? To, flipping that on its head and be like, well, what if it does work out? Like, what if this is an amazing next step for me and my team? What if this is exactly what I hoped it would be? So it certainly sounds like that's a key factor that's definitely played in well for you. And I would even go so far to say, Sila, coming back to your earlier point of being able to anticipate curveballs and navigate, change that's up and coming, that's probably kind of baked in there too around keeping that composure and calm even in those moments of competition. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I think, one buzzword in my industry right now is unsurprisingly artificial intelligence, right? Ever since that's been introduced in the world and in the media and business and our social lives everywhere, I've just been anticipating change. Like whether it's within my company, whether it's outside of my company, and that actually then makes change less scary, and change is actually a constant. And so, um, I choose to have sort of like a positive, optimistic mindset about what that change could enable for us. versus sort of like fearing the unknown and fearing potential change. And I find that that positivity actually makes me more agile, excited, motivated, and sort of opens doors to, how I can be a part of that. And in being a part of that, I know that I can bring my values and responsibility when creating and catalyzing that change.
That is amazing to hear. I love, love, love that for you. And I really hope our listeners are taking this away as how you can see change as something really positive to fuel you forward and not something to fear. And on that note of change, because to your point, Scylla, you've seen so many like exciting changes, probably in the last week alone. But if we kind of take a bit of like a step back, what would you say has been one of the most exciting shifts that you've led for your teams?
Mm. I think what's most important as a leader and manager is improving the satisfaction and the happiness of your team so that they are more motivated to work and perform and deliver. I took on this like really hairy, messy operational challenge that our entire marketing department at the time was experiencing, because I knew that it was going to have exponential impact, not only in terms of the output of my team, but also their sort of like happiness and fulfillment. And Yeah, and it was not easy. It was definitely a lot more of a load on me, sort of like representing and sort of like leading this change for like multiple departments within marketing. But I was happy to sort of like see that we did come to a resolution. We did drive measurable improvement in sort of like the output and the speed at which my team was able to deliver. And by sort of like opening their doors and blocking them to do their best work and enabling them, I do think that they became happier and more fulfilled and hopefully trusted me and my leadership more, which, I hope was a good change for the team.
That's a really good example. I particularly appreciate that you shared something that was pretty challenging that brought out the best in you and your team as opposed to kind of just riding the coattails of something that feels kind of easy and is already maybe a growth area of the business. And that's so important because you're also setting such a good example for your team of what it takes to move through those challenges and those changes with confidence and in a way that fuels happiness and the empowerment for them. Maybe in a similar vein, how would you say, Scylla, that you manage risk to take big bets, even if they feel really new or uncertain?
Yeah. Yeah, so, taking on that operational challenge was actually a risk. It was a very sort of like impossible problem. But I sort of, I got this advice from somebody like very early on in my career, and it's about sort of like careers and jobs are a juggling act, right? At a given time, you'll have multiple projects on your plate, and you kind of want to have an 80-20 rule where you want to know that you're going to deliver and do a good job with about 80% of it. And then the remaining 20% is sort of like your risk bucket, right? That's where you take on some risky projects where if you deliver, it's awesome. That kind of takes you above and beyond. If you don't deliver, everyone can be like, you know what, that was a risky project. She took it on, didn't work out, but like she's doing great with all of her other projects, so all good, right? And so, I knew that I had a solid reputation at the time. I had delivered great results for myself and my team. And so I had the leeway to take on that risk. And it worked out. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's fine. But I find that that sort of has worked out well for me in the past.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Just seeing the way that you broke that down with the 80-20 split, but also tying it back to the reputation and personal brand that you built for yourself. Because I can imagine when it comes to taking those bets and you don't necessarily have a track record for success or taking certain risks, it can actually be a lot harder to get that support or buy-in from some of the decision makers that you might need their input on. So I like that kind of balance. In a way, almost kind of like experimenting in a lesser risky pool, even if it is something risky in its nature, that it's offset by some of the really good stuff that you're kind of known for and people could count on you for in the team as well. I think that's such a helpful strategy to take back and put into action as we think about our own work and our careers, of those bets that we want to take, and probably the ones that are maybe worth taking, right? Like picking the right battles. Have you ever found for you, Scylla, that like you've been caught between a rock and a hard place of like you really wanted to take this bet, but you were maybe getting pressure from leadership to go in a different direction and you had to really like stand up for what you believed in and faced a little bit of pushback on that?
Yeah. I'm sure I have. I'm trying to think of an example. I find that I'm pretty autonomous and proactive, so I'll sort of, identify what needs to be done and I'll do it. I don't really receive pushback, in which case I think I trust my leaders. I trust the people that I work with. If I don't, then I probably shouldn't be there.
It's a good point.
Right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and so I'd wanna hear their feedback. I'd wanna sort of, like, listen and be open to why they are pushing back. And then you sort of wanna, reason and put out your own reasons for why I wanna go ahead with something, and then try to kind of, see who like, to try to have a healthy discussion and come to a resolution. I I I I don't believe in sort of like conflict in the workplace. I believe in collaboration and sort of at some point one side has to sort of disagree and commit, which is a leadership principle from Amazon. And chances are the person that is more senior to me has greater visibility into the broader picture and more experience and more seniority and I'll listen to, what they have to say.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Like that additional insight. And I maybe shifting gears slightly when we talk about change. I mean, I think it's safe to assume that AI is changing the way you work by the minute, like nearly every other sector that we see out there. But what are you really seeing kind of in the day in, day out in terms of those shifts?
Yeah. So I think there's the present and then there's the future. In the present, I think there's a lot of talk about AI and its capabilities and what it can actually deliver. There's a big delta between those two things, right? In the future, I don't think there will be that great of a delta. And I do think there will be significant transformation in all parts of our lives. And again, I'm cautiously optimistic and excited about the change, and I believe that we can do it in a responsible way. Coming back to today, I'll give you an example of how I used Gemini Deep Research, which is one of our newest Gen AI models. I was given a task, by our director, and I was like, oh God, like, not this thing again. Like, I see the value. Like, when I do it, I know it's gonna get sent to like the general manager of and I know that people will see the value of that work, but the process of doing it sucks for me.
I appreciate the transparency. I mean, I think there's a lot of things like that where we're like, ugh, have to get it done, but I don't really want to.
Yeah, it's like taking out the garbage. You're like, I know I need to do this, but like the process of doing it sucks, right? Like it smells, whatever. And so I was like, all right, like let's give Gemini a run at this. And what I saw is that it expanded my thinking. It actually made me think bigger and in sort of like different ways than I would have thought at the outset on my own. Um, it accelerated the output a little bit, so I was able to like actually get some time savings and kind of like have more time to myself. But was it able to kind of like complete that task without me or without my guidance? Absolutely not. And so, to me, that's a win-win situation, right? It's like I'm in the driver's seat. I'm telling this agent what to do. It's responding to me in a timely manner with quality output and as a thought partner. And as a result of that, I'm delivering something that's even better and faster. And I have time. I went to the gym. it's like new year, new me. It was like a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, perfect. We're just, I just ate a lot, so this is great.
Oh, what a good example. Yeah, it's so clear how it is elevating the day to day and like the way that you're approaching your work, but also where you still hold a really pivotal role in bringing it to life. And I think that's an excellent way of looking at it and really inspiring from it. Maybe on the flip side, Scylla, I'm curious what you'd say is a non-AI related shift that's having a big impact, or maybe even a people related shift that you're seeing pretty prominently in the workplace right now.
Again, I can only sort of like speak to sort of like my industry. But one thing I've observed is this is that I find that, whether it's somebody who's new to working or sort of like or more in their tenure, I find that everybody is now really prioritizing having a balanced mindset. And when I say balance, I mean, work and sort of like personal life. Um, and I think that's one of the biggest sort of outcomes of the pandemic, where sort of like prioritizing your wellness has become so important. Um, and I find that, companies are kind of enabling their employees to have more balance. And I find that hybrid and more flexible work arrangements are actually an enabler for this. And I think what's most encouraging and great to see is that that sentiment is actually kind of present across all cohorts, right? Whether it's the interns or the first years that I see within our company, or, I think, more tenured people. I find that that's sort of like omnipresent, and that's I think really great to see.
Mm, it's such a needed shift too, right? Like it's proving in a lot of ways like we don't have to stick to such traditional ways of working and how you can be productive and really meeting people where they're at and putting the people first kind of mindset of I say this all the time, with the clients that we're supporting around it's very hard to show up as your best self if your well-being isn't in check or you're not able to prioritize some of those really important personal aspects in your life. So to be in an environment or an organization that really recognizes that balance and encourages it and enables it makes all the difference. So I love that you're really seeing that more and more as well. I think it's going to continue to evolve and we'll see how that unfolds, but exciting to say the least. And maybe if we kind of stay on the topic of tech, which I know is obviously an area of expertise for you, Scylla, what would you say are maybe like the top 2 or 3 skills in your view to really thrive in tech these days?
Yeah. Honestly, like I think there's a mix of sort of like technical and soft skills, but I find that the soft skills are starting to gain more and more importance, especially as we're sort of starting to see tech and AI advance and kind of take on a lot of that. But I'll say that from a hard skill perspective, data analysis and just sort of like analytical skills are always super important. And then more on the soft side, I think some like along the lines of what I've just said is sort of like agility and adaptability and positivity. Just to be able to anticipate change and be comfortable with it. And then sort of like lastly, that empathy piece where, human to human connection and relationship skills are so important to collaborate, which is sort of like rooted in tech culture. So I think it's really about being able to be analytical, because within tech we just have so much data and we just observe and see what is happening and what we should do through the use of that, but then also balancing it out with sort of those soft skills that are increasingly important in order to lead and collaborate.
Oh, 100%. And especially as you grow in seniority, like that's what really starts taking even more precedence. I love that you really emphasize the empathy piece. I'm big on that. It builds so much connection and deepens relationships. And when we think about it, it's not, just about who you know, it's about who knows you and also how you make them feel, right? I can imagine for you, Scylla, you've likely attracted, a lot of people towards your teams or have had amazing collaborations across departments that you're working with because of the way that you show up and bringing that level of integrity and intention. So that's great. I'm also kind of interested in hearing when you are, let's say, bringing people onto the team or building your team, what are some non-negotiables that you think about that's really helped you and your team excel so well in that?
Yeah, I'd say, it's hard to screen for the non-negotiables because I find that they tend to be very subtle and sort of like between the lines.
Yeah.
But one thing that I believe is a non-negotiable is sort of having an open and growth mindset. If somebody no one is perfect and everyone is always growing and evolving throughout their career as they take on more challenges or new problems and tasks, and being open to feedback, right, and being open to actually hearing that and being able to manage that feedback effectively, um, is critical, and if that's not a skill that you have developed, then it's going to be very challenging to work with you in the present and in the future. So, it's difficult to always identify right off the bat, but it is, I think, a non-negotiable.
Oh, yeah. I love that insight. And I think some like very practical cues for that as you start working with someone is, their willingness to learn and, show that they're open to asking questions and that they want to continue to be the best version of themselves. So a lot of it could come through like those day-to-day interactions, but probably also as their leader and manager, the way that they show up for a challenge, the way that they collaborate with other people, the way that they are taking on maybe something really difficult and building resilience through that, even if it feels really challenging. So I think that's such a good one to keep top of mind. And I'm with you. It's hard to kind of suss that out completely, but you probably get a sense from, the type of person, the personality, asking questions around, past struggles or challenges that they've gone through, just to kind of see like their thought process of which parts they really pick up on and emphasize in that journey. Yeah, that's a good one. I'll also say, Sila, that confidence and integrity are often recurring themes on our show. And I'd love if you could talk about what those mean to you and how you maintain both.
Yeah, I think kind of similar to sort of what I said earlier on. I think you build confidence from knowing that you're showing up as your best self, right? Like focusing on the things that you can control, which is, you're doing your best and you're showing kindness and empathy, and and that is sort of like within my control, and that should give me confidence. I think it's as simple as that, and I think, integrity is sort of rooted in that as well, right? If you're showing up based on your values of, a strong work ethic and sort of like, really great human connection, um, then that kind of like fuels your confidence.
Yeah, that's really well said. I agree with that. And it's often the simple things that we don't have to overcomplicate this stuff. It just like do this and do it and continue to do it and be consistent. Because consistency really just plays such an important role, right? You don't want to feel like one day you're showing up as one version of yourself, and then the next day it's a totally different version of Scylla. So it certainly sounds like that's been a common thread there too, which is wonderful. I know we talked a little bit about some of those key skills to really thrive in tech. What if we were, talking with someone who's thinking to pursue a career in tech or maybe make a pivot right now? They're in a different industry. Maybe they're in consumer brand and now they want to go into consumer tech or something along those lines. Is there any other quality or skill that you feel would be a real must have to consider and showcase in that transition?
Yeah. Yeah, I think across the tech spectrum, I think various companies value different things when it comes to career switchers. I think one bucket of tech companies will value the expertise, like the industry expertise that you might already have and kind of bring to the table. And so if you're sort of like deep rooted in consumer packaged goods and you kind of want to transition into, into tech from like a more, industry, from the industry, then that is something that you bring to the table and you want to sort of like surface. I will say that there's a different, like a second bucket of tech companies out there that really value sort of like critical thinking and problem solving. And, it's less about what have you done in the past from an industry expertise perspective, but can you come into this ambiguous environment where no one is the expert, right? It's like we're building AI from scratch and reimagining what the world might look like, and no one knows. And so, are you able to bring that critical thinking and that problem solving mentality, um, and how can you sort of like demonstrate that you've done this in the past, right? So I think those are sort of like two ways into tech these days.
Mm, that's a really clear breakdown. So helpful. Thank you for sharing that. I love that kind of inside out perspective, right? Because you're seeing so much of this every day and every month that passes. So that's a really good one to latch on to, of just seeing how to make that change and elevate the parts that might stand out most based off the organization you're targeting next. Oh my gosh, we've covered a lot today, Scylla. Maybe as we wrap up, I have one last question I'd love to know, which is, what would you say is one piece of advice that you would actually tell your younger self if you can go back to the start of your career?
Yeah, honestly, it's so simple. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? I think there's ups and downs in your career, and I think earlier on in your career where everybody's sort of like within the same cohort and within sort of like the same ladder, it feels like, oh my god, I'm gonna I'm gonna be left behind, or I'm gonna fall behind my peer set. But you'd be surprised, right? You might be a couple years behind one day, and then you might be a few years ahead the next day. And so the your career path and your journey is your own. Everyone does it in their own time, in their own way. It's not about comparing yourself to others. And you might have a year where you decide to pull back. You might have a year where you decided to lean into the curveball. It's a marathon, and your goals might change as well. So it's about sort of like enjoying the journey and that process of learning rather than sort of comparing yourself to others or where you think you should be at a certain time. Um, so it honestly, it's very simple, and it kinda gives me a lot of peace of mind to say, like, I have a lot of time to try different things, to learn, and to ultimately get to the place where I wanna be, which there's many options for that place, right? There is not a single job or role that I want. There's many options, and I'm curious to see where that marathon will take me.
Mm. I mean, that's powerful, simple but powerful, because the way that you're going about that, Scylla, is you got an idea of that goal, that longer term vision, but you're being flexible around the path to get there, and the ebbs and flows that might come along with that, which honestly makes things a lot more fun and allows you to be more open to opportunities that come your way. Like maybe it's something you didn't expect, and now, that was actually a great thing. And just being open to that. And it goes back even to what you shared about that skill around growth mindset. I feel like that's also kind of baked into treating it as a marathon, not a sprint. And even from like a comparison standpoint, because I know it's easy to fall into that trap. But if we're going to fall into comparison, let it be to inspire of what's possible rather than something that's going to hold you back from what you're capable of. So I love that you've just kind of, rounded that out for such an amazing, amazing episode with generous insights, Scylla, that you brought our way. Thank you for taking the time with us today. It was such a fun conversation
Yeah, I
together.
loved it.
I'm sure our listeners have a lot of notes from this and
Mhm, I
kind of
hope
things
so.
that they can action in their own careers right now. But if any of our viewers and listeners want to get in touch with you, Scylla, or learn more about you and your background, what's the best place they can find you?
Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Like I said, I cold call people, and I definitely pay it forward. I have mentors all around the world. that I've never met. So I'm always happy to connect and just chat or help where I can.
Oh, thank you, Scylla. Well, honestly, I mean, you've been so kind and open and all of the insights that you shared today. And I'm so happy that we've had a chance to feature you and everything that you've achieved up to this point and what you'll continue to achieve moving forward, which is so exciting. A lot of change happening, but you're kind of at the front row, seeing it day in and day out. And I
Hope
can't
so.
wait to keep in touch and see what unfolds for you.
Yeah.
And for everyone who did tune into today's episode, thank you so much for listening in. I'd love to know if there's any key takeaway or takeaways that really stood out to you or topics that you'd like us to dive even further into in our upcoming episodes. Just drop a comment, let me know, or hit me up on social media. Let me know what stood out to you. I'm always curious to hear your takeaways. And if you are also at a point in your career where you are ready to take that next step and really get into those higher levels of growth and impact, would love to speak with you as well. You could definitely head over to my website, tiffanyhuman.com, and book a session with us to chat and see how we can support you further. But all that say, I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode. Definitely be sure to subscribe. We have some amazing ones coming your way. And thank you again, Scylla, for your time today. It's so appreciated, and look forward to continuing to watch you soar.
I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Bye. What is your go-to morning routine these days?
Ooh, that's a good one. Honestly, I'm such a gym rat these days. I love to wake up and like hit the gym. I have my favorite classes. It gets me going in the morning. Just like a great fresh start to the day. And then I read the news.
That's a pretty solid one. I agree with you. I love starting the day with a good workout. It gets that energy flowing and sends some good vibes coming into the day and the week.